Hello, I'm Harry. Running a garage was my goal, but as my workload increased, I realized I needed additional room. Craigslist came through with a discount on a larger garage, and I leaped at the opportunity. The new place seemed disorganized, as if it hadn't seen light in years. Cleaning it felt like exposing secrets better left buried. Nonetheless, as I cleaned away the grime, I sensed eyes on me. Pushing it aside, I shifted my car, eager to start over. However, the emotion remained, becoming stronger with each passing moment. Then came the footsteps, echoing through the empty garage. I turned, my heart pumping, only to see shadows. Panic came in as I realized I was confined within, a prisoner of my own making. And there he was, a man, or something resembling one, with crazy eyes and a gravelly voice. He seized the garage as his own and refused to let me leave. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice wavering from dread. The man chuckled in a low, frightening tone. "I am the custodian of this place, and you are trespassing." I tried to reason with him, pleading for my freedom, but he just laughed. As the tension between us increased, he tied me up with ropes and made more unpredictable demands. He rummaged through the garage tools, his eyes wide with desperation, looking for something, anything. The mystery man's hurried search through the garage tools sent shivers down my back. His hands raced with frantic speed, delving through drawers and shelves as if looking for something elusive. With each clang of metal against metal, my heart raced faster, and the tension in the air grew with each passing moment. What was he searching for? What horrors would he unleash if he discovered it? The shadows appeared to shut in on us, strangling us as the man's wild eyes darted around the dimly lit room, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. It was as if the darkness itself had seized hold of him, driving him insane in its unrelenting chase. Then, without notice, he started my cars, breaking the silence with the thundering noise of their engines. I watched in terror as he began smashing their windows, his axe motivated by a madness I couldn't understand. The sound of shattering glass rang around the garage as the invader focused on my cars. With each strike, my heart dropped deeper into my chest, and the sight of broken windows sent shivers down my spine. It was a visceral reminder of the violence lurking under the surface, ready to be unleashed at any time. I watched in terror as he moved from car to automobile, his movements propelled by a rage that seemed to engulf him from within, and as pieces of glass covered the ground like fallen stars, I couldn't help but wonder, what else was he capable of, and would I become his next victim? "Why won't you give me what I want?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls of the garage. "I need money. I need it now." I refused to cooperate, even as he became more aggressive, his cries morphing into unintelligible screams of wrath. He started the garage machinery, and the thunderous boom drowned out any rational thought. The unidentified man continues to pace back and forth, his movements irregular and frantic, as if looking for an escape route. He begins talking to himself incoherently, his words a tangle of paranoia and hallucinations. He abruptly comes to a halt and stares at me with extreme scrutiny, as if attempting to gaze into my soul. He begins taking down posters and placards on the walls. His activities are getting more disruptive. Throughout it all, I refused to let him break me. I held firm, my resolve unshaken even as terror threatened to devour me. In the midst of the turmoil, he began to ask irrelevant questions about my past, my worries, and anything else that could make me uncomfortable. His comments were like knives penetrating through my thin layer of calmness. The intruder starts laughing maniacally, and the sound echoes off the garage walls, sending shivers down my spine. He snatches a nearby tool and wields it menacingly, his eyes gleaming with danger. The intruder begins to knock on the garage door, requesting to be let out. his voice becoming increasingly urgent with each passing instant. He begins to repeat odd incantations or prayers quietly, his voice a frightening whisper in the darkness. But just when everything seemed lost, a ray of hope appeared. A faint sound, then the distant cry of sirens, getting louder with each passing instant. With renewed purpose, I distracted the invader, forcing him to slip and fall, the stink of alcohol permeating the air. Seizing the moment, I called 911 and prayed for salvation. As the cops arrived and removed the intruder, I couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung in the air. Who was he, and what terrors did he bring with him? As I went outside the garage, relief rushed over me, and I was delighted to be free of its crushing clutches. But the nightmare wasn't done. The police revealed that he was mentally sick and a victim of his own tortured thoughts. And as I watched him leave into the night, I couldn't help but wonder what demons had driven him insane, and will they come for me next? Jade, a 26-year-old aspiring artist, had recently settled into a cozy loft in the city's historic district. After her gallery closed, she needed a more affordable place to live. She stumbled upon an ad for a loft that was surprisingly cheap and decided to take it. The loft was charming, with rustic brick walls and a view of the city skyline. The neighbors were a mix of artists and old-timers, except for one, Mrs. Winters, who lived next door. She was a reclusive figure, rarely seen and never heard. The first few nights were serene, and Jade relished the quiet. But then odd things began to happen. Jade would wake to soft murmurs outside her door late at night, but when she checked, the corridor was always deserted. As the days passed, the murmurs grew more frequent, and Jade couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to tell her something. She would press her ear against the cool wall surface, listening intently, but the whispers were always just out of reach, their meaning slipping away like shadows at dawn. One night, a sharp wail broke the stillness. Jade's heart raced as she considered seeking help. But when she spoke to Mrs. Winters the following day, the neighbor dismissed it, claiming it was just a radio show she enjoyed at night. The strange events didn't stop. Unknown visitors would arrive at Jade's door, claiming Mrs. Winters had invited them. Jade never welcomed them in, but the anxiety mounted. She felt cornered, with no job prospects and her savings running low. Then, on a night filled with restlessness, Jade heard it again. The unmistakable sound of someone weeping. It was coming from Mrs. Winters' loft. The sobs were laden with such sorrow that Jade knew something wasn't right. She started to notice the shadows seemed to cling a little too tightly to the corners, and the way the air would sometimes grow cold with no explanation. Jade began to keep a journal, documenting everything she observed. She wrote down times, dates, and descriptions, hoping to make sense of it all. The journal filled up quickly, each entry more puzzling than the last. One entry read, "Midnight. The weeping again. It's louder now, almost as if it's right outside my door. But there's something else. A faint melody playing in the background. I can't find the source." Another said, "Early morning. The visitors are more persistent. They leave notes now saying, 'Mrs. Winters awaits.' But awaits what?" Jade's sleep became fitful, her dreams filled with images of locked doors and hidden rooms. She would wake with a start, feeling as if she had been running all night. The loft began to feel oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The once charming view of the city skyline now seemed distant and unreachable. Jade felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition that something terrible was about to happen. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Jade heard a new sound, a low, eerie growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was a sound that didn't belong to any human or animal, a sound that chilled her to the bone. That night, the whispers turned into voices, clear and distinct. They spoke of hidden truths and unspeakable acts. They spoke of Mrs. Winters and the loft's dark history. Jade listened, frozen in fear as the voices recounted tales of past residents who had vanished without a trace, their fates forever unknown. Jade felt an inexplicable sense of not being alone. There was a feeling, a whisper of something or someone else in the loft with her. It was as if the very air had shifted, carrying with it the weight of unseen eyes. She couldn't explain it, but it was as though the shadows held secrets, watching her every move with an intangible gaze. The air grew thick and the darkness seemed to swallow the light. Jade felt a presence behind her, a breath on her neck. She spun around, but there was nothing, only the empty room and the echoes of her own heartbeat. In the deepest hours of the night, the building itself seemed to come alive. The walls groaned with the weight of centuries, and the windows rattled as if trying to keep out more than just the wind. Jade's mind raced with thoughts of escape, but where could she go? By morning, Jade decided it was time to go. She packed her art supplies and clothes, not bothering about the deposit. As she left, Mrs. Winters watched from her doorway, her gaze unsettling. So soon? Was everything to your satisfaction? Her cackle resonated as Jade departed. Jade left with unanswered questions. What was happening in that building? Who was weeping in Mrs. Winters' loft? And what did Mrs. Winters mean by satisfaction? Jade couldn't shake off the feeling that she had narrowly escaped from something dark and mysterious. As she walked away from the structure, the sun began to come up and started shining with a very warm, gentle glow upon the city. Jade was able to let the loads go, but there will always be things she will never forget about the house and the mysterious things it harbored. She tucked her diary under her arm, a record of the puzzles, and walked ahead into a new day, unseen steps behind catching up with her. I'm Alex, an ordinary person living a mundane existence in the city. But things took a bad turn when I realized I needed a new place. With my landlord raising the rent beyond my limits, I scoured web postings for a cheaper alternative. Among the multitude of advertisements, one stuck out. Eagle Eye Movers, reliable and affordable. Desperate for a solution, I emailed them, and within minutes, I had a response from a man named Jack who promised to help me. On moving day, Jack arrived punctually at my door. He was tall and imposing with penetrating eyes that appeared to analyze my every motion. He emanated a confidence that bordered on arrogance. But with no other options available, I reluctantly accepted his help. As we carried boxes onto the truck, I couldn't shake the sense of anxiety that hung in the air. Jack's manner was stern, his motions efficient, but devoid of warmth. Despite his professionalism, something seemed odd about him. He had a subtle sense of threat that sent shivers down my spine. Hours passed before we finished shifting my possessions into the new apartment. Exhausted and relieved, I said goodbye to Jack, appreciative for his assistance but eager to be free of his presence. That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of footsteps echoed around the empty apartment, startling me awake. With my heart hammering, I crawled out of bed and into the darkness only to face Jack, his stare icy and calculating. Before I could respond, Jack sprang at me and easily overpowered me. Bound and gagged, I could only watch in dread as he ripped through my stuff. His motivations are unknown but clearly sinister. However, Jack wasn't acting alone. Paul, my old apartment's cleaner, turned out to be a collaborator in their sick scheme. As I battled against my bindings, I couldn't get over the betrayal of learning that Paul, whom I had once trusted, had worked against me. As Jack and Paul began their relentless search through my stuff, it became clear that they weren't just looking for valuables, but something considerably more evil. Their desperation was evident as they upturned each object and rifled through each drawer, sending shivers down my spine. They appeared to be searching for a needle in a haystack. They didn't spare a stone because of their unyielding resolve. However, what might they be? What are you trying to find? How come they singled me out? The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the minutes turned into hours. Fear and expectation were palpable in the air. I couldn't help but wonder what sinister secrets lied beyond the walls of my otherwise ordinary apartment. In a forgotten corner of my wardrobe, Jack found an assortment of old journals. He grinned triumphantly as he turned the pages, his eyes growing larger with every new entry. Jack's gaze moved towards me, a silent challenge burning in his eyes, and I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach. It was evident that whatever he had discovered was significant and had the potential to change everything. In a desperate attempt to discern the truth, Jack returned his gaze to me. His voice was venomous as he demanded an answer. Who am I really? What secrets was I keeping? Bound and gagged, all I could do was shake my head in defiance, refusing to let him shatter me. But deep down, I realized that time was running short, and that if I didn't find a way out soon, I might never have another chance. As the minutes passed into eternity, I braced myself for whatever twisted fate awaited me, knowing that learning the truth would be the key to survival behind Jack and Paul's nefarious plan. Just as I thought I couldn't take another second of their agony, a sharp noise broke the calm, penetrating through the darkness like a ray of hope. I felt a rush of relief as I understood that rescue had finally arrived, signifying the end of Jack and Paul's reign of terror. As law officers surged into the room, Jack and Paul fled. Their schemes were foiled and their secrets were left hidden in the darkness. Though the scars of their betrayal remain, I emerged from the tragedy stronger and more resolute than ever before, eager to recover my life and rebuild on the ashes of my past. But just as I believed the nightmare had ended, the lead detective approached. He spoke to me with a solemn countenance and an urgent tone. He disclosed a startling revelation that turned my world upside down. Jack and Paul were not simply random crooks. They were part of a larger, more sinister organization with connections to key persons in the city. The investigation had only just begun, and the real scope of their malicious influence was far more than anyone had anticipated. I've envisioned. As I reflected on this insight, I understood that my struggle was far from done, and that the fight for justice had only just begun.